So, tonight we're going to be restoring a vintage, 1988, is that vintage? I don't know. Anyway, we're going to be fixing up this model car that I bought. So, if you look at the rest of my channel, you'll know that I drive the same model Prelude as this, and I had one as my first car, so I really wanted a model that was the same as my original one, which I still have, but it needs some TLC. So I found this one on Yahoo Auctions in Japan and had it sent over here. It's blue and it's got a tan interior, which are both the wrong colours because they didn't come in this blue. It's not a colour they're available in, and my original one was Phoenix Red. So I went out to the paint shop today and had a bottle of R51 Phoenix Red mixed up. What we're going to do pretty much is just drill the rivets out, take the body off, strip the paint off, paint the interior grey instead of tan, then repaint the outside red. The first thing I'm going to do is get a drill bit that's big enough to cover the entire rivet. So this is a, I'll probably go 3.5mm. So I'm going to go 3.5mm and drill the rivets out so we can get the body apart. So you want to go pretty easy with this so you don't drill too far into it. Just want to drill enough to get the head off the rivet and be able to remove the body. Yeah, so you can see there it's just enough that the head of the rivet's gone, and we should be able to get the plastic base to fit over the rivet. So once our rivets are drilled out, we're ready to lift the base off. On the base there's just the wheels with the little piece of steel that does the suspension, so we'll work on the wheels later, straighten them out. The interior should come out, so we're going to be repainting the interior to match my original red Prelude that I'm going to try and make this a model of. So we'll set the interior aside. The interior glass that pops out as well. We'll be polishing up the glass to get rid of the fine scratches and making it look like it's new again. And then we've got the body with the spring inside it that operates the doors. Well, there you go. That's how the doors come out. So the spring's springed and the doors come up. So, ooh. Just noticed it's got a separate plastic taillights, so we'll get the taillights out, which we can see on the inside is 2 clips. So pop the lights out. This plastic's all pretty old and brittle, so just take everything easy. Once the lights are out, we've got to put the body and the doors into some paint stripper to get them cleaned up, ready for new paint. So what we're going to do to remove the paint is we're going to get a Ziploc bag and pour some paint stripper into the bag, and then we're going to put the car in the bag and let it sit for a while, and hopefully it'll remove all the paint for us. So we'll give it a bit of a swish around, make sure that the thinners have covered the entire body, and then should sit for a few minutes, and then we should see all the paint starting to peel off. It's been in there for about a minute so far, and we can see the blue paint is no match for the paint thinners. So it's been sitting in there for probably 10-15 minutes now. It looks like most of the paint's flaking off, so I'm going to take it off and give it just a clean up with a toothbrush to get off any of the last flaky bits under some running water, and then we're ready for the next step. So it looks like most of the paint's gone, but I'm not really happy with it because there's still paint stuck in some of the grooves. So I'll put it back in the bag with a fresh bit of paint stripper and give it another 10 minutes. So we've given it another 10 minutes in there. I think we'll go and give it another scrub with the brush and then ready for paint. So that seems to be all the paint that the paint stripper is going to remove. So what we're going to do now is just get a Stanley knife blade and use it to get any remaining bits of paint out of the panel gaps. Once I've got most of the paint out of the gaps, I'm just going to use some fine sandpaper. This is 1000 grit to remove the paint on any flat surfaces like here where we don't want it. So now that the body's been sanded down, I'm going to go to a lighter grit sandpaper to get rid of any of the scratches. So we've given it a final sand with the lighter sandpaper. So now that the car has all the paint and everything cleared off it, and we've sanded down any rough spots, I've given it a final wipe with some thinners just to make sure there's no grease or anything left on it. Now ready to do the top coat. So I'm going to top coat it with the paint that I bought. Because this is proper automotive paint, it's fairly thick. So to keep all the details in the car and stop the paint filling the details, I'm not going to do an undercoat or anything. I'm just going to put this straight on, and I'm going to try and put it on as thin as I can get away with to stop it filling in any of the little detailed panel gaps and everything that the car has. So I'm going to put the paint straight into the airbrush, and I'm going to thin the paint down till it's about the consistency of milk. Now it's looking about correct. It's hard to see in there, but it's about the consistency of full cream milk. So now that we've done that, ready to start putting light coats onto the car. You can't expect much out of the first coat. The full colour won't come through yet, it'll look a bit dull, but you just keep adding light coats over and over and over until eventually you get the colour that you think it's supposed to be. The other thing you need to make sure you do is make sure that you get the bottom of the grille and the bottom of all the details, because you'll paint the top of the car, and once you take it off the holder, you'll notice that the undersides of everything is still looking a bit grey. Now once it's looking like we've got the correct colour, like we've put on enough coats that it's stopped being pink and it's starting to look red, we're going to do the final coat. Now the final coat's the hardest one, because what we're going to do is do our strokes across, slowly filling in the car, but we need to make the paint that we lay on thick enough that you can see where you've just gone across and the paint's wet, and there needs to be enough paint that the paint can settle and like run flat so it doesn't look like it's spray, it looks like it's nice and evened out instead of like a rough sandpapery finish like what we've got now. Then you need to do the next line across so that the next line like flows into the one before it, and it's called keeping a wet edge. So we need like a wet paint edge that we move along the car. The idea is when that paint dries, it'll dry nice and glossy, and it'll give us the least amount of polishing we have to do afterwards. It's a really fine line between not putting on enough for it to look wet and then putting on too much and getting runs. So we'll make sure there is a good bit of paint left in the gun, because if you run it empty it'll spatter the last bit out, so we've got enough left to do it. So we'll do the final coat. So I don't know if it comes across in the video, but that is a lot shinier than all the base coats. So we'll do the same for the sides and then wait for it to dry, and then we're ready to polish it. I'm going to paint the interior grey instead of tan. I didn't have a grey paint that was the colour I wanted, so I've mixed together some primer and some black paint to make the shade of grey I wanted. All I've done is gotten the spray cans and sprayed them into this tin, and because they've come out of a spray can, they're already thinned out to the correct consistency to go in the airbrush. So we've got the paint loaded into the airbrush, and we'll give the interior its first coat. The hardest thing with the interior is going to be making sure that every surface is covered, because there's so many little lumps and bumps and everything in it. So I'm pretty happy with the coverage on there now. I'm just going to leave it as plain grey, but this is a point where if you wanted to go into a bit more detail, you could paint the carpet a different colour and the seats a different colour and add in whatever details you wanted to add. So what I'm going to do now is start working on the glass. If you've got a really slow Dremel, you could probably use the polishing wheel on the Dremel, but I'd recommend against it because it's easy to melt the glass. What I'm going to do is get a normal rag that you'd use like polishing a car. Use some car polishing cutting compound. Whoop, not that much, but you get the idea. Mush it up in the rag and then just start working it into the windscreen until we eventually polish all the fine scratches out of it. So I've been working on this for about 2 minutes now, and you can already see the difference between the front where I've polished it and the back where it's still got all the scratches. On a car like this that's got opening doors that let stuff on the inside, you want to polish the inside a little bit as well, but remember that most of the scratches are going to be on the outside, so spend most of your time working on the outside rather than the inside. Be super careful not to put too much pressure on it and break the glass, because plastic that's 25 years old is pretty brittle. And after about 10 minutes, our glass is looking nice and clear again. So now, while we've got the interior and the body set aside for drying, we'll work on the wheels. Because this car, like any other toy car, has been stepped on 1,000 times, it's got, depending on which way the axle's facing, either demon camber or a lot of toe in and a lot of toe out. So removing the axles on this is pretty simple. You just lift them over the top of the spring. All we're going to do is slide the wheels to one end of the axle so we can get the bent bit and use a pair of pliers to bend the axles back out straight. As far as the wheels themselves, they look like the chrome and everything's all in pretty good condition, so I'm just going to leave them. But I will have my eye out for the new Honda City Hot Wheels car because it's got wheels that I'd really like to put on this. So if you want, you can get wheels from another Hot Wheels car and they'll just fit in, but I'm going to use the original ones for now. Okay, so that's looking pretty straight now. We'll just slide the wheels to the other end and then do this end. Once the wheels are straightened out, it's just a matter of popping them back in underneath the spring. So we just hold the spring up with our fingers or with something, drop the wheels into their slot, and then let the spring jump back down top of them. So now our suspension's back and our wheels are looking nice and straight. So this is where things can get a bit tricky. These are the tail lights, and obviously they're not supposed to be black. It's a Series 1 Prelude, so the orange indicator on the top with the red bottom, we're just going to paint the orange and red on with a brush. Now, you always paint the lightest colour first, because the darker colour will cover the lighter one. So we'll paint the orange first, and if the orange accidentally gets on the bit that's supposed to be red, the red will cover it. But if the red gets on where it's supposed to be orange, the orange won't cover it. So we'll do the orange first, and then the red we'll have to be careful with after. So once our orange is looking dry, we can go on with the red bottom half. Now with the orange, because it was the first coat and the lighter colour, it didn't matter if we accidentally went into the red area, but with the red, we're going to have to be very careful not to go over into the orange. So I'm pretty happy with that. Ready to move on to the rest of the car. So now that the car's had a while to dry, we know the paint's hard, we're going to use some really fine polishing compound. The thick stuff that we used for the glass, if we use it on this, it's just going to take the paint off because of how thin it is. So nice thin polish, and we polish it just like you'd polish a real car, but with I'm using a lot less pressure than I would on an actual car because of how thin the paint on this is. So I don't know if you can see it in the video, but the roof is now significantly shinier than the rest of the car. So on with polishing the rest of it. Now we've been polishing this for a few minutes. You can see it's getting a nice glossy finish. It's up to you how far you want to take the polishing, because if you take it too far you will go through the paint and you'll have to start again. Now, just as I was saying about going through the paint, I've gone a little bit too hard and taken the paint off one of the bump strips on the doors. I'm not going to worry about it because I'm going to paint the bump strips black in a minute anyway. So once we've finished polishing, we're going to come with the black and do the bump strips. The reason we do the bump strips after we've polished it is because we want the red to be glossy, but we want the bump strips to come out matte so they look like rubber. It's these little scale details, like the bump strips, that really make this look like a nice model car instead of just a toy by the time it's done. So take your time adding in any small details like this. Now unfortunately the one on the front's going to look a little bit wavy, because although the real car has a bump strip on the front, it's not really moulded into the model, so we're just going to have to try and guess where it goes. So the bump strips are pretty much done. The front's a bit how's it going because it's not actually moulded in there and I'm just guessing. But considering how it looked before when it was its original blue colour, I think it looks a lot nicer. So I'm just going to get the red paint and touch up any little bits where I think I've gone too low. I've also got to do the windscreen washer strip, which should be black too, and then we're ready to put it back together. So the first thing that goes back in was the glass. So after putting the glass in, the next part we've got to put in is the doors. It's really easy to chip and scratch this new paint now because it's quite thin, so we need to be careful with this. Once we've got the doors back in, we can fit the spring. The spring went in the little slot here on the side of the door over the center pin, and then once it's over the center pin we can bend it into the other slot. This is pretty tricky, so it'll take a couple of goes, and it's hard to get a good video of because my hands are in the way. And there we go, the doors are into their spots and it's all looking very nice and professional. Drop the interior into place and then put the base back on. Once the base is popped on, there's a few things you can do. Some people drill and tap the old rivets for small screws, but I don't have a setup to do that. You can put some epoxy on there to hold the car on, but I'm normally happy to just leave mine loose because it only sits on a shelf, and then if I ever want to take it apart again to change anything, it's easy. So we'll pop the taillights back in, and now we're done. So this is the finished product. I think the best way to describe it is probably good from afar, but far from good. On the shelf next to all the other cars it looks really nice and it stands out as looking a lot nicer, but then up close it's not great, but I'm pretty happy with it for a little Hot Wheels car. I think for next time I need to work out a nicer way to paint the bump strips on to get a nice sharp edge instead of by hand. But other than that, it looked like it came out really nicely. So if you want to see more of this sort of thing and some drift videos and some quadcopter videos and whatever else I put up, be sure to subscribe. Thanks.